Pine Ridge never made the news. This small town in northern Michigan, with a population of just over 7,500, lived a quiet life of lumber mills and farms. The main street stretched for only 8 blocks, and the tallest building was a water tower painted in the colors of the local school team. At 247 Maple Street, the Butler family woke up on another Tuesday in October 2023 to the sound of the alarm clock that Alan had set for 5:30 a.m. He always got up before everyone else, a habit he had picked up during his time in the Army. At 42, Alan Butler still had a military bearing. Although 15 years after returning from Iraq, his shoulders had become more sloped and his temples had turned gray. "Coffee's ready," he said quietly as he entered the bedroom, where his wife, Caitlin, was still hiding under the covers. She worked as an administrator at Dr. Miller's clinic and could afford to sleep until 7. "Thanks," Caitlin muttered without opening her eyes. At 38, she was still an attractive woman, although the wrinkles around her eyes were becoming more noticeable and her hair needed to be touched up more often than before. Alan stood in the doorway for a few seconds, watching his wife pull the blanket over her head. Once, he could have spent hours looking at her sleeping face. Now, these moments of intimacy seemed rare and strained. Alan had been working as a senior mechanic at Johnson & Sons auto repair shop for 12 years. The owner, Bob Johnson, trusted him with difficult repairs and often left him alone to close up the shop. That day, by 10 in the morning, Alan had a beat-up Chevrolet on the lift whose transmission needed to be completely replaced. "The Davises are skimping on maintenance again," he muttered, looking at the oil stains under the car. Working with his hands always calmed him down, made him forget the anxiety that had settled in his chest after Iraq and only grew stronger over the years. At that moment, Caitlin was sorting through medical records at the clinic located 3 blocks from their home. Dr. Miller's clinic was the only medical facility in Pine Ridge, except for a dentist's office and a veterinary hospital. Caitlin had been working there for 8 years, ever since their youngest son, Ethan, started school. "Mrs. Butler, we have a new pharmacist," Nurse Jenny said, peeking into the administrator's office. "Dr. Miller wants you to fill out the paperwork for him." Caitlin looked up from her computer. New faces were rare in Pine Ridge. Young people usually left for the big cities, and the only ones who came here were those who wanted to escape the hustle and bustle of city life or had no other choice. Michael Thornton appeared at the door at exactly 2 o'clock, as agreed. A tall man of 35, wearing a neatly ironed shirt and dark trousers, he looked unusually elegant for Pine Ridge. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his thin-rimmed glasses hid intelligent brown eyes. "Michael Thornton," he said, extending his hand. "I understand I need to fill out some paperwork to work at the clinic." "Caitlin Butler," she replied, noting his firm handshake and the faint scent of expensive cologne. "Please have a seat." While they filled out the forms, Michael told her that he had moved from Detroit after his divorce and was looking for a quiet place to live. He had a degree in pharmacy from the University of Michigan and experience working for a large pharmacy chain. "Have you been here all your life?" he asked when they finished with the paperwork. "Almost," Caitlin smiled. "I only left to go to college in Grand Rapids, but then I came back and got married." She fell silent, suddenly feeling uncomfortable about sharing her personal life with a stranger. "I understand," Michael nodded. "Sometimes roots hold you tighter than you think." That evening, Caitlin was cooking dinner when Alan came home. He went silently into the bathroom to wash the machine oil and sweat off his hands. In 20 years of marriage, she had learned to tell his mood by the sounds he made. Today, his footsteps were heavy and tired. "How was your day?" she asked when he came down to the kitchen. "Fine," Alan replied curtly, taking a beer out of the refrigerator. "How about you?" "We have a new pharmacist. He moved here from Detroit." Alan nodded, not showing much interest. He turned on the TV and switched to the news, which was reporting on the problems facing the Michigan auto industry. At dinner, their children, 17-year-old Jake and 15-year-old Emma, talked about school. Jake was getting ready to graduate and planned to attend a technical college in Traverse City. Emma was involved in the theater club and dreamed of the big stage. "Maybe you should think about something more practical," Alan remarked, as his daughter enthusiastically described the upcoming production. "Acting isn't a profession. Dad, it's the 21st century. Emma retorted. "You can do what you love." "You can if you have something to live on," Alan muttered. Caitlin saw the excitement fade from her daughter's eyes and felt a familiar irritation. Alan had become too cynical, too withdrawn. The man she had once fallen in love with was gradually disappearing under layers of fatigue and disappointment. After dinner, the children went to their rooms to do their homework. Alan settled in front of the TV with another beer, while Caitlin tidied up in the kitchen. It was a typical evening in a typical family in a typical American town. But this normality had long since concealed something else. Unspoken words, alienation, quiet disappointment with a life that had somehow taken a wrong turn. And although none of them realized it yet, a change had already entered their measured lives in the form of Michael Thornton. 3 weeks had passed since Michael's arrival in Pine Ridge. During that time, he had managed to settle into a small apartment above a bakery on Main Street and blend into the rhythm of the small town. His pharmacy, Pine Ridge Pharmacy, was located in the same building as Dr. Miller's clinic, which meant regular contact with Caitlin. "Insulin prescription for Mrs. Harris," Caitlin said as she entered the pharmacy with another batch of prescriptions. It was her third trip of the day, and she noticed that Michael smiled at her warmly each time. "Sure," he replied, taking the papers. "By the way, I wanted to ask if there's a good place in town to get a decent cup of coffee. Sorry to be blunt, but what they serve at Mary's Diner is hardly coffee." Caitlin laughed. "I understand. Mary brews it in the morning and keeps it on the stove until evening. To be honest, there's no decent coffee in town. I usually buy beans in Traverse City when I go there." "How often do you go?" "Once a month, on Saturdays, for things you can't find here." She paused. "If you'd like, I can bring you some good coffee next time. I know a great place." "That would be wonderful," Michael said, and Caitlin felt something warm spread through her chest at his grateful look. At home, the atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense. Alan was coming home from work later and later, and he smelled of beer more and more often. Their conversations were limited to discussing household issues and the children's problems. Physical intimacy had all but disappeared. They slept in the same bed, but it was as if a wall had grown between them. "Mom, is everything okay with Dad?" Emma asked one evening as they were washing the dishes after dinner. Alan was sitting in front of the TV with a beer, as usual. "What do you mean?" Caitlin asked cautiously. "He seems distant, and he's drinking more than he used to." Caitlin didn't know how to respond. She had noticed the changes herself, but didn't know how to deal with them. Attempts to talk to Alan ended with him getting irritated or completely silent. On Saturday, Caitlin drove to Traverse City. Alan stayed home with the children, saying he was tired. At dark roast, she bought a pound of Ethiopian Arabica beans, one package for herself and one for Michael. "That's very thoughtful of you," he said on Monday when she brought him the coffee. "But let me repay you for your kindness. Maybe we could have this coffee together? I have a nice coffee maker upstairs." Caitlin hesitated. It would be wrong to go up to his apartment. But then again, what was wrong with a friendly cup of coffee with a colleague? "Okay," she agreed, but only for a few minutes. Michael's apartment was tastefully decorated but minimalist. Books lined the shelves, a few paintings hung on the walls, and the furniture was comfortable. It smelled of fresh coffee and men's cologne. "It's cozy," Caitlin remarked as she accepted a cup. "I try to make my home a home," Michael replied. "You have a beautiful family. I saw your children in the photo in your office." "Thank you. Jake and Emma are good kids. Alan can be a little strict with them sometimes, though." "Alan is your husband?" "Yes. We've been married for 20 years. For some reason, as she said the words, Caitlin felt a strange emptiness. "That's a long time," Michael remarked. "It's rare these days." "Yes, we met in high school. He joined the army after school, then came back, and we got married." She fell silent, realizing she was sharing too much personal information. "Have you ever thought about leaving here? Seeing the world?" "I have," Caitlin replied quietly, but life turned out differently. They talked for over an hour. Michael told her about Detroit, his job at a large pharmaceutical company, and his travels. Caitlin listened, forgetting the time. It had been a long time since she had met someone who could talk so interestingly about the world outside Pine Ridge. "I have to go," she said, glancing at her watch. "Thanks for the coffee." When she got home, Alan didn't even ask where she had been. He was watching a program about the war in Iraq, and Caitlin noticed how tense his shoulders were. "Alan, can we turn that off? Talk a little?" "About what?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the screen. "I don't know. Anything. We hardly ever talk." "What is there to talk about? Work? Home? The kids? What else?" "About us. About what's going on with us." Alan finally looked at her. She saw fatigue in his eyes and something else. Irritation. "Nothing is happening between us, Caitlin. We live, we work, we raise children. That's life. But there used to be more between us. We used to be younger and stupider," he interrupted. "Now we're adults with responsibilities." Caitlin felt tears welling up in her eyes. "When did you become so cynical?" "When I realized that fairy tales don't come true," Alan said, and turned up the volume on the TV. The next day at the pharmacy, Michael noticed that Caitlin looked upset. "Is everything okay?" he asked cautiously. "Yes, just some things at home." She tried to smile. "You know, if you ever need to talk, I'm a good listener," Michael said. "Sometimes an outside perspective helps." "Thank you," Caitlin replied sincerely. "That's very kind." That night she lay awake for a long time, thinking about how her life had changed. She had once dreamed of a career in the big city, of traveling, of true love. Now she was 38 and felt like she was fading away in a quiet provincial swamp. Alan was snoring beside her, smelling of beer. Caitlin remembered what he had been like 20 years ago, young, strong, full of plans. The war had broken something in him, but he never talked about it. He had withdrawn into himself, and all her attempts to reach him had been met with a wall of silence. In the days that followed, her meetings with Michael became more frequent and longer. He often stopped by the clinic on business, but their conversations were less and less about work. They talked about books, movies, life in big cities. Michael was educated and well-read, and Caitlin felt her long, dormant intellect awakening in these conversations. "Do you have a favorite author?" he asked her one day. "I used to love Jane Austen, but that was a long time ago, back in college." "Why did you stop reading?" Caitlin wondered. "I don't know. First the children, then work, then the house. There's never enough time." "There's time for what's important," Michael remarked. "I have a nice edition of Pride and Prejudice. I can lend it to you." "No, I'd hardly find the time." "Give it a try. Sometimes you need to do something for your soul." At home, Caitlin hid the book in her bedside table. She read it in the evenings when Alan fell asleep in front of the TV. It was a strange feeling, as if she were secretly returning to her true self, to the girl who once dreamed of a great life. Alan began to notice changes in his wife. She became more lively, sometimes smiled for no reason, stayed late at work. His military experience had taught him to notice details, and the details were alarming. "Are you getting more work?" he asked one day when Caitlin came home half an hour later than usual. "Yes, the new pharmacist requires a lot of coordination," she replied. And Alan noticed how she avoided his gaze. "What's he like, this pharmacist?" "Normal. A professional." But the tone of his wife's voice told Alan something else entirely. There were notes in it that he hadn't heard in years. Excitement, interest, something akin to inspiration. That evening, while Caitlin was taking a shower, Alan noticed a book on her bedside table. Jane Austen was not the kind of reading his wife had been choosing in recent years. He picked up the book and saw an inscription on the flyleaf. "To Caitlin, with hope for a return to beauty, M." Something cold stirred in Alan's chest. He quickly put the book back, but the unpleasant feeling remained. November in Pine Ridge was particularly cold. The first snow fell 2 weeks earlier than usual, covering the town in a white blanket. Caitlin stood at the clinic window, watching the few passers-by hurry from one building to another. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a familiar voice said behind her. Michael approached the window, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need something to warm you up." "Thank you," Caitlin smiled, taking the cup. Their fingers accidentally touched, and she felt a strange warmth from the touch. Over the course of a month and a half, their interactions became a daily ritual. Michael found reasons to stop by the clinic, and Caitlin lingered at the pharmacy longer than necessary. Their conversations ceased to be superficial. They discussed books, shared memories, and talked about their dreams. "I brought you another book," Michael said, pulling a small volume from his pocket. "Margaret Atwood. I think you'll like it." "Michael, you're doing too much for me," Caitlin protested. "Coffee, books, people might think." "What might they think?" he asked, looking into her eyes. "That one person cares about another? What's wrong with that?" Caitlin felt her cheeks flush. There was something more than friendship in his words, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that. "I have to go," she said, taking the book. "Thank you." That evening, the atmosphere at home was particularly tense. Alan came home from work in a bad mood. Another client had refused to pay for repairs, citing financial difficulties. "That's the third one this month," he said grimly as he opened a beer. "We'll be working for free soon." "Maybe you should ask for payment in advance?" Caitlin suggested. "Easy to say. Competition is fierce. People will go to Matson." Alan slumped heavily into his chair. "Sometimes I think it's time to move to another city or change careers." "What would you do?" Alan shrugged. "No idea. At 42, the options aren't great." Caitlin looked at her husband and suddenly realized that she knew almost nothing about his thoughts, his fears, his true desires. Once they could talk about anything, but now there was a gulf of unspoken words between them. "Alan, remember how we dreamed of buying a house by the lake? Silly things we said when we were young," he dismissed. "Back then, it seemed like anything was possible. And now? Now I know that life is work, bills, and responsibilities. Romance is for those who can afford it." There was so much bitterness in those words that Caitlin felt a pain in her chest. What had happened to the guy who used to read poetry to her under the stars? The next day, she told Michael about the conversation. They were sitting in his apartment, drinking coffee and looking out at the snow-covered street. "He wasn't always like this," Caitlin said. "The war changed him. He never talks about what happened, but I can see that something broke inside him." "PTSD?" Michael suggested cautiously. "Maybe, but he doesn't acknowledge the problem and doesn't want to see a professional. He says that's for weak people." "What about you? How do you cope with it?" Caitlin thought for a moment. "Honestly, sometimes I feel lonely in my own home. We live like neighbors, not like a married couple." Michael leaned closer. "Caitlin, you're an amazing woman. Smart, beautiful, kind. You deserve happiness." Their eyes met, and tension hung in the air. Caitlin felt her heart beat faster. "Michael, she began, but he gently touched her hand. "I know you're married, but I can't pretend I don't feel something special when we're together." Caitlin pulled her hand away, but not right away. "I have to go." "Wait," Michael said. "I don't want to embarrass you. Just know that if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm always here." At home, Caitlin stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at her reflection. When was the last time someone called her beautiful? When was the last time she felt desirable? At dinner, Alan was quieter than ever. The children talked about school, but he just nodded, not participating in the conversation. "Dad, are you listening to me?" Emma asked. "I'm talking about the school play." "Yes, of course," Alan replied distractedly. "That's great. I said I'm playing the lead role in Romeo and Juliet." "Good." Emma looked at her father with hurt. "And I also said that I'm flying to Mars tomorrow." "Great." Alan nodded, and only then realized what he had missed. "What?" "Nothing, Dad. Never mind." After dinner, Emma went to her mother. "Mom, is everything okay with Dad? He's been acting strange lately." "He's having problems at work," Caitlin explained. "Don't worry about it." But she was becoming increasingly concerned. Alan wasn't just silent. There was something alert and suspicious in his eyes, especially when she mentioned work. A few days later, Michael suggested a new way for them to communicate. "I have an idea," he said. "My nephew gave me an iPad with a good camera. We can video chat in the evenings when it's convenient for you. It's like the future." "I don't know." Caitlin hesitated. "What if someone sees?" "Who could see? It's at home, in private. Just friendly conversation." The temptation was too great. Caitlin missed normal human interaction, the opportunity to talk to someone who understood her. Okay, she agreed, but only sometimes when the family is asleep. The first video call took place on Friday evening. Alan had fallen asleep in front of the TV, and the children had gone to their rooms. Caitlin went up to her bedroom, closed the door, and turned on the tablet she had secretly bought a week ago in Traverse City. Michael's face appeared on the screen, and she felt a strange excitement. "Hi," he smiled. "How are you?" "Quiet. Everyone's asleep," she whispered. "No need to whisper. I can't hear you." They talked for over an hour. Michael told her about his life in Detroit, his travels, his plans for the future. Caitlin shared her thoughts on the books he had given her and talked about dreams she had long since buried. "You know what I like about you?" Michael said toward the end of the conversation. "You haven't lost your ability to dream, no matter what. Sometimes it feels like I'm just running away from reality." What's wrong with running away sometimes? Especially if reality doesn't bring you joy. After the conversation, Caitlin couldn't sleep for a long time. She felt guilty and excited at the same time. Technically, it wasn't cheating, but deep down she knew she had crossed some line. The video calls became regular, twice a week in the evenings, when the house was asleep. Michael was always happy to hear her and always found words of support. Gradually, their conversations became more personal. "Caitlin, can I ask you a personal question?" he asked one day. "Depends. Are you happy in your marriage?" The question hung in the air. Caitlin was silent for a long time, searching for the right words. "I thought I was, but now I don't know. We've grown too different." "What about intimacy?" Caitlin blushed. "Michael, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you. It's just that you're a beautiful woman and you need to hear that." Meanwhile, Alan was becoming increasingly suspicious. He noticed that Caitlin often lingered in the bathroom before bed, had become more attentive to her appearance, and was buying new cosmetics. Military training had taught him to read people, and all the signs pointed to one thing. On Saturday, when Caitlin went shopping, Alan decided to do what he had been putting off for a long time. He searched her things and found a tablet hidden in the closet between the bedding. Turning on the device, he saw the video call history. Dozens of conversations with the same contact, MT. The last call was last night and lasted over an hour. Alan's hands were shaking as he put the tablet back in its place. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a home together. And now this. Betrayal. That evening, he looked at his wife with different eyes. Every smile, every movement seemed fake. When she said she was going to take a shower, he knew she was going to talk to him. On Sunday, Alan went to church for the first time in many months. Pastor James Walker noticed him right away and came over to talk after the service. "Alan, how are you? Long time no see." "Everything's fine, Pastor," Alan lied. "Just thought I'd drop in." "How's Caitlin? The kids?" "Fine, everything's fine." But Pastor Walker, who had known the family for many years, sensed the insincerity in his voice. "Alan, if you need to talk, I'm always here for you. I know your tour in Iraq took a toll on you." "That's not it," Alan replied sharply. "Some wounds aren't inflicted in war." At home, the atmosphere was becoming more tense with each passing day. Alan had become openly hostile, giving his wife suspicious looks and making snide remarks. "You've got a lot of work to do," he said on Monday when Caitlin arrived half an hour later than usual. "Yes, new procedures for recording medications," she replied. "I see. Probably that new pharmacist making everything more complicated." Caitlin sensed something was wrong in his tone. "What's going on, Alan?" "Nothing. Just interested in your work. We don't talk about personal stuff very often." But she saw something dangerous in his eyes, a cold rage that he was struggling to contain. That evening, while talking to Michael on video chat, Caitlin shared her concerns. "He suspects something," she said. "He's asking strange questions and looking at me differently." "Maybe it's time to tell him the truth," Michael suggested. "What truth?" "That there are feelings between us. That you're unhappy in your marriage." Caitlin froze. It was the first time anyone had said it so directly. "Michael, I have children. They'll grow up and understand. You deserve to be happy, I don't know, it's so complicated. Think about it. You only live once, Caitlin. Don't waste it on something that doesn't make you happy. After the conversation, she sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about his words. Downstairs, Alan was watching the nightly news, and the sound of the television drifted through the floor. The ordinary life of an ordinary family. But now that ordinariness seemed like a prison, and in the next room, her children were sleeping, unaware of anything. Tomorrow, they would wake up, go to school, and make plans for the future. They didn't know that their world was already beginning to crumble, that the decisions made by adults would soon change their lives forever. Silence reigned in the house on Maple Street, but it was a deceptive silence before the storm. Too many secrets had accumulated under one roof, too many unspoken words hung in the air, and everyone involved in this family drama felt that something was about to happen. Something inevitable was approaching, like a winter storm that can be seen from afar but cannot be stopped. Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, began like any other day in Pine Ridge. The thermometer read -8 degrees Celsius. The wind drove dry snow through the streets, and the few passers-by hurried from building to building, wrapped in warm coats. At 247 Maple Street, the morning proceeded according to schedule. Alan got up at 5:30, as usual, made coffee, and ate breakfast in silence while reading the local newspaper. Caitlin came down at 7, helped the children get ready for school, and quickly drank a cup of coffee, avoiding prolonged eye contact with her husband. "I'll be late tonight," she said, putting on her coat. "I have to finish the annual report for the insurance company." Alan looked up from the newspaper. Something sharp and predatory flashed in them. "I understand," he said in an even tone. "Work is the most important thing." Caitlin sensed something behind his words, but decided to ignore it. The atmosphere in the house had been so tense lately that every conversation could turn into a conflict. The day at the clinic passed relatively calmly. Dr. Miller saw his scheduled patients, Nurse Jenny sorted through files, and Caitlin dealt with insurance paperwork. The work required concentration, but her thoughts kept returning to yesterday's conversation with Michael. "I need to see you," he had said. "Not on video chat, in person, to talk about us, about the future." "Michael, it's dangerous. Let's meet at my apartment, after work. Just to talk. I promise." And now she couldn't think about anything else. What would she say to him? Was she willing to destroy her family for an uncertain future with a man she had known for only a few months? At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Pastor Walker walked into the clinic. He often visited Dr. Miller. The old priest had high blood pressure and came regularly for prescriptions. "Good afternoon, Caitlin," he greeted her. "How are you? Haven't seen you at church lately." "I'm sorry, Pastor. Lots of work, kids, house." "I understand. How's Alan?" "He stopped by on Sunday and seemed a little troubled." Caitlin pricked up her ears. Alan hadn't been to church in over a year. "Troubled?" "Yes. He mentioned some wounds that weren't from the war. I offered to talk, but he refused." After the pastor left, Caitlin felt even more uneasy. What did Alan mean? Did he know something? At 5 in the evening, she closed the clinic and headed to the pharmacy. Michael was waiting for her, as always, neatly dressed and smiling. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Caitlin nodded, though her heart was beating so loudly that it seemed to echo throughout the building. Michael's apartment was lit by the soft glow of table lamps. 2 cups of tea and a small box of chocolates were on the table. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the sofa. "We need to talk seriously." Caitlin sat down, folding her hands in her lap. She felt like a schoolgirl being called to the principal's office. "Caitlin, I can't do this anymore," Michael began, sitting down next to her. "These secret conversations, the furtive meetings, I want to be with you for real. Michael, listen to me. I know you're married and you have children, but you're unhappy. I see it every day. Your husband doesn't appreciate you, doesn't understand how amazing you are." Caitlin felt her eyes fill with tears. "What are you suggesting?" "Let's leave here, together. I've been offered a job in California at a large pharmaceutical company. Good salary, new life, new opportunities. What about the children? We'll take them with us, or they can come visit during the holidays. Children adapt faster than adults. Michael took her hands in his. I love you, Caitlin. Probably from the first day I saw you. Words she hadn't heard in many years. Words that made her heart ache with pain and joy at the same time. Me too, she whispered, but it's so complicated. Nothing should be complicated when it comes to love. Michael leaned toward her, and they kissed. For the first time in 20 years, Caitlin kissed someone other than her husband. The kiss was tender but full of the passion she had been deprived of for so long. Think about it, Michael said when they parted. Don't rush into anything, but think about it. Life is too short to spend it being unhappy. Caitlin stayed with him for another hour. They talked about the future, made plans, dreamed aloud. When she got ready to leave, it was already dark. See you tomorrow? Michael asked. Yes, on video chat as usual. What time? Around 10, when everyone's in bed. At home, the usual scene awaited her. Alan in his chair in front of the TV with a bottle of beer, the children in their rooms doing their homework. But something in the atmosphere was different. More tense, more alert. How's the report? Alan asked, without looking up from the screen. I'm done. I'll send it to the insurance company tomorrow. Good. I hope it was worth it. There was a hidden threat in his tone that Caitlin couldn't help but notice. At dinner, the children talked about what had happened at school, but Alan was silent, occasionally glancing strangely at his wife. When Jake asked his father about his plans for the weekend, he replied curtly and fell silent again. Dad, are you listening to me? Jake repeated. I hear you, Alan replied sharply. I'm just thinking about work. What work? It's evening. Work in general, about how important it is to be honest with people who trust you. Caitlin felt a chill run down her spine. There was a hidden meaning in those words, directed at her personally. After dinner, the children went to their rooms. Alan settled down in front of the TV as usual, but Caitlin noticed that he wasn't watching the screen, but was thoughtfully twirling a beer bottle in his hands. I'm going to take a shower, she said. Sure, Alan replied. And then maybe you'll read before bed? Maybe. You've been reading some good books lately, classics. Caitlin froze. How did he know about Michael's books? Yes, I decided to return to my old hobby. That's commendable, and the dedications add a special charm, don't they? Now there was no doubt. He knew. How long had he known? What else did he know? Alan, if you want to say something. I don't want to say anything, he interrupted, finally looking at her. In his eyes, she saw a cold fury that made her step back. Just enjoy your reading. In the bathroom, Caitlin stared at her reflection in the mirror for a long time. Her face was pale, her eyes frightened. What should she do? Confess everything? Deny it? Run to Michael right now? She took a hot shower, hoping it would help her calm down, but her anxiety only intensified. Alan knew about the books, and maybe he knew about the video calls too. His military training had taught him to be observant. If he had decided to watch her, he probably already knew everything. When she came out of the bathroom, Alan was still sitting in front of the TV. The channel had switched to the news, which was reporting on the rise in divorce rates in the country. Interesting statistics, he remarked. It turns out that most marriages break up because of infidelity. Caitlin didn't answer, and quickly went into the bedroom. She put on her nightgown and lay down in bed, taking the book Michael had given her. But she couldn't read. The lines blurred before her eyes. At 10 o'clock, she heard Alan coming up the stairs. He usually went to bed later, but something had changed in his routine today. Early tonight, she remarked as he entered the bedroom. Tired, he replied curtly, starting to undress. Aren't you asleep? Just finishing a chapter. Alan lay down in bed but didn't turn off the bedside lamp. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, and Caitlin could feel the tension emanating from him. At 10:15, her tablet vibrated, an incoming video call from Michael. Caitlin glanced at her husband. He seemed to be asleep, breathing evenly. Carefully picking up the tablet, she went down to the living room. Michael's face appeared on the screen, illuminated by the soft light of his desk lamp. Hi, beautiful, he smiled. How's it going at home? Quiet. Everyone's asleep, Caitlin whispered, settling into a chair. Have you thought about our conversation? It's all I've been thinking about, Michael. I'm afraid Alan suspects something. What makes you think that? Strange hints, questions. He mentioned the dedications in the books. Michael frowned. Seriously? Maybe we should speed up our plans? How? Tell him everything tomorrow. Say you're unhappy, that you want a divorce. I'll be there to support you. Caitlin shook her head. You don't know Alan. He can be dangerous when he's angry, especially when he feels betrayed. Then we can't delay any longer. The longer we wait, the worse it will be. They talked for another half hour, discussing the details of a possible escape. Michael suggested she leave with him on the weekend without waiting for the divorce to be finalized. We'll sort everything out through lawyers later, he assured her. The main thing is to get you out of this situation. What about the children? We'll get them later once we're settled, or they can choose who they want to live with. When the conversation ended, Caitlin felt a strange sense of relief. The decision was made. Tomorrow she would tell Alan the truth. Not everything, but enough to start the divorce proceedings. She went up to her bedroom and carefully lay down on the bed. Alan was still lying motionless, turned toward the wall. Caitlin closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. Around midnight, she heard Alan get out of bed. He quietly went to the bathroom, then went downstairs, probably for a beer. Lately, he often couldn't sleep without alcohol. But a few minutes later, he returned, and Caitlin heard a strange sound, a metallic click that she couldn't identify. Alan lay down in bed again, but his breathing was uneven and intermittent. On the morning of November 15th, Caitlin woke up determined to talk to her husband. But Alan got up earlier than usual and left for work without breakfast. There was a note on the kitchen table. I'll be late at work. Don't wait up for dinner. The day at the clinic passed in a fog. Caitlin mechanically performed her duties, but her mind was preoccupied with the upcoming conversation. How to start? What to say? How to explain it to the children? Michael came in twice, but she barely responded to his questions. Too many emotions, too many fears. Everything will be fine, he said for the last time. Tomorrow, you will be free. That evening, the children had dinner without their father. He never came home from work. Caitlin called the car repair shop, but they said Alan had left at 4 in the afternoon. He probably just stopped somewhere, she told the children. Dad's a grown man. He can take care of himself. But inside, her anxiety grew. Where was he? What was he doing? In his condition, he could do something stupid. At 9 o'clock, the children went to bed. Caitlin tidied up the kitchen and went up to the bedroom. Alan was still gone, and his phone wasn't answering. At 9:45, she heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, the creaking of floorboards. Alan finally came home. He entered the bedroom silently without turning on the light. He smelled of alcohol and cold. Where were you? Caitlin asked. Thinking, he replied, sitting down on the edge of the bed with his back to her. About what? About us, about family, about what loyalty means. There was a sinister determination in his voice that made Caitlin tense. Alan, we need to talk. I know, he said, turning to her. In the dim light of the street lamp, she saw his face, stone cold, alien. But first, I want to show you something. He took her tablet out of his pocket. Do you recognize this? Caitlin felt her heart sink. Alan, I can explain. You can, but I'd rather show you. He turned on the tablet, found the video chat app, and tapped on the contact labeled MT. A few seconds later, Michael's face appeared on the screen. Caitlin, you're early today. I thought we agreed on 10. Michael fell silent when he saw that Caitlin wasn't holding the tablet. For a few seconds, the men stared at each other through the screen. Good evening, Alan said in an even voice. I'm Alan Butler, Caitlin's husband. I'm not what you think, Michael began, but Alan hung up. A dead silence fell. Caitlin sat on the bed, unable to say a word. Alan put the tablet on the bedside table and slowly stood up. 20 years, he said quietly. For 20 years, I thought we had a real family. Alan, please. You were just playing the role of a good wife until someone better came along. That's not true. I didn't want it to turn out this way. Alan laughed, short, bitterly. You didn't want it? What about the video calls every night? The secret meetings? The escape plans? How did you find out? I'm not an idiot, Caitlin. I was trained in the army to observe and draw conclusions. He walked over to the window and stood there, staring out at the snow-covered street. You know what hurts the most? It's not that you found someone else. It's that you didn't even try to save our marriage. You just decided that the grass was greener on the other side. We haven't spoken in years. You shut me out, the children, the whole world. And that gives you the right to cheat on me? Caitlin got out of bed and walked over to him. Alan, I didn't want to hurt you, but I'm suffocating in this life. I need something more. Something more, he repeated. I see. He turned to her, and she saw such pain in his eyes that her heart ached. What about the children? Aren't they big enough for your ambitions? The children will understand. When they grow up, they'll understand. No, Alan said. They won't, because normal people don't abandon their families for fantasies. Caitlin felt a surge of anger. Fantasy? What do we have? Is this a life? You come home, drink beer, watch TV, and say nothing. When was the last time we had a heart-to-heart? When was the last time you told me you loved me? I thought love was shown through actions, not words. I work, provide for the family, take care of the house. That's not love, that's duty. And your video calls with your lover are love? They stood face to face, shouting at each other for the first time in years. All the pain that had built up, all the unspoken resentment poured out. Yes, Caitlin shouted. It's love. When a person is interested in your thoughts, your dreams, when you can talk to him about anything in the world. And for that, you're willing to destroy your family? The family is already destroyed. We live like strangers under the same roof. Alan took a step back. There was such pain in his eyes that Caitlin was frightened. All right, he said quietly. If that's what you think, then so be it. He went to the dresser, opened the top drawer, and took out something that made Caitlin's blood run cold. A gun. A military Colt .45 that he had brought back from Iraq, and which she thought he had sold or thrown away long ago. Alan, what are you doing? He didn't answer, checked the magazine, and cocked the hammer. Alan, please think about the children. They're all I'm thinking about, he said, raising the gun. About them living with their traitorous mother. Alan, no. The sound of the gunshot in the night was deafening. Literally a minute after the shot, screams filled the house. Jake and Emma woke up to the sound and ran out of their rooms. Mom! Dad! What happened? Emma screamed, banging on the bedroom door. Dad, open the door! Jake added. There was no sound coming from the bedroom. Jake, being older and stronger, broke down the door with his shoulder. What they saw changed their lives forever. Their mother was lying on the floor, motionless, in a pool of blood. Their father was nowhere to be seen. The first call to the emergency services came at 10:47 p.m. 17-year-old Jake Butlers' voice trembled with horror and shock. My mom is dead. There's blood everywhere. Help! Patrol cars arrived on Maple Street 4 minutes later. Officers Davis and Thompson found the house open, with two teenagers sitting in the living room, a boy and a girl, both in their pajamas, both in a state of deep shock. Where's your mom? Officer Davis asked. Upstairs in the bedroom, Emma whispered. We can't go in there. Detective Linda Wright received the call at 11:15 p.m. A 45-year-old woman with 20 years on the force. She had seen a lot, but domestic violence always hit her particularly hard. Upon arriving at the scene, Wright first secured the crime scene and interviewed the first officers to arrive. What do we have? She asked Davis. A woman, 38 years old, gunshot wound to the head. The children found the body around 10:45 p.m. The husband is not at the scene. Weapon? Not found, but judging by the entry wound, large caliber, possibly a .45. Wright went up to the bedroom. Caitlin Butler was lying on the floor between the bed and the dresser. She had a single gunshot wound to the temple, fired at close range. A tablet with a broken screen lay on the floor. Any signs of a struggle? Wright asked forensic technician Martinez. Minor ones. An overturned lamp, traces of blood on the wall. It looks like the victim tried to move away from the shooter. Wright carefully examined the room. There were books on the bedside table, one of them open, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. On the flyleaf was written, To Caitlin, with hopes of returning to beauty. M. Interesting, muttered the detective, photographing the book. The tablet was damaged, but still functional. Martinez was able to retrieve the data. The video call history showed regular conversations with a contact named MT. The last call began at 9:52 p.m. and was interrupted at 10:11 p.m. Going downstairs, Wright sat down opposite the children. Jake was holding his younger sister's hand, both of them pale as a sheet. "Jake, Emma, I know this is hard, but I need to ask you a few questions. Where's your father?" "We don't know," Jake replied. "He left in the morning and didn't come back for dinner. Mom said he was working late." "When did he come back?" "Around 9:30. We heard the door open." "Did you hear your parents talking?" The children looked at each other. "They were shouting," Emma said quietly. "Loudly. We've never heard them argue like that before." "What were they arguing about?" "We don't know. We were in our rooms doing our homework, but Dad was shouting something about cheating." Wright made a note. "And then?" "Then there was a gunshot," Jake swallowed. "We ran to their bedroom, but the door was locked. Dad wasn't answering. We had to break down the door." "And your father wasn't there?" "No, only my mother was on the floor." Wright called social services for the children and began searching for Alan Butler. His truck wasn't in the garage, and his phone wasn't answering. The next morning, the detective visited Johnson & Sons Auto Repair. The owner, Bob Johnson, was shocked by the news. "Alan? A murderer? It can't be." The elderly man shook his head. "Yes, he was withdrawn after the army, but to kill his wife." "How has he been lately?" "Strange. He's become even more silent in recent weeks. He left early yesterday, said he wasn't feeling well." "What time?" "Around 4. Then he came back in the evening around 8. Said he'd forgotten his tools." "What tools?" Johnson led Wright into the workshop. "That's strange. All the tools are here, but he was rummaging around in his locker for a long time." The detective examined Alan's personal locker. Inside, she found family photos, military medals, and an empty box of .45 caliber bullets. The next stop was the pharmacy. Michael Thornton looked exhausted and frightened. "I can't believe she's dead," he repeated. "This is all my fault." "Tell me about your relationship with Mrs. Butler." Michael told her the whole truth, how they met, how they fell in love, the video calls, and their plans to run away. "There was a call last night," he said. But instead of Caitlin, her husband answered. He knew everything. "What exactly did he say?" "He introduced himself as Caitlin's husband. I tried to explain, but he hung up. There was no further contact." Wright examined the video call records. The last conversation lasted 19 minutes. Technical experts were able to recover part of the audio recording from the tablet's cache. The voices of Caitlin and Michael discussing their escape plans. "Tomorrow I'll tell him everything. Not the whole truth, but enough to get a divorce. You can leave with me on the weekend. We'll start a new life." By the evening of the second day, the search for Alan Butler had yielded no results. His truck was found in a parking lot by Lake Hastings, 20 miles from Pine Ridge. The keys were on the dashboard, and the fuel tank was almost empty. "Looks like suicide," said Officer Thompson. "Classic pattern, killed his wife and then himself." But Wright didn't think so. Divers combed the lake and found no bodies. There were no signs of a struggle or blood around the parking lot. On the third day, the detective received a call from Pastor Walker. "Detective Wright, you need to come to the church. Alan is here." Wright arrived with backup. Alan Butler sat in the front row of the pews, staring motionless at the crucifix. He did not resist arrest. At the station, Alan was silent for a long time. Only after several hours did he begin to speak. "I didn't plan to kill her," he said quietly. "I wanted to scare her, to show her I knew about her affair. Tell us what happened." "I found the tablet a week ago. I saw those calls and caught her lying. I knew she was cheating on me, but I thought maybe we could still work things out." Alan told how he had been following his wife all week, how he found out about her plans to run away with her lover. "Last night I decided to talk to him. I called him from her tablet. I wanted to hear what he had to say. And then what happened? Caitlin came home. We had a fight. She said she loved him, that our marriage was a mistake, that the children would understand." Alan's voice trembled. "I couldn't take it. 20 years of my life, 2 children, and it all meant nothing to her. Where did you get the gun? I brought it back from Iraq. I kept it in a dresser. I took it out to scare her. I wanted her to understand how serious I was about our family. But you fired. Alan closed his eyes. She laughed. She said I wouldn't do it, that I was a weakling who couldn't keep his wife. And then I don't remember pulling the trigger. Detective Wright gathered all the evidence, the children's statements, video call recordings, fingerprints on the gun, which was found in the lake the next day, and neighbors' testimony about screams coming from the Butler home. Pastor Walker described Alan's state in the last few weeks. He came to church and talked about wounds that aren't inflicted in war. I offered family counseling, but he refused. He said some things can't be fixed. The trial took place 4 months later. Alan's lawyer insisted on a guilty plea for manslaughter, citing PTSD and emotional stress from his wife's infidelity. The prosecutor demanded a first-degree murder conviction, emphasizing the premeditated nature of Alan's actions. Witnesses included the children, Michael Thornton, Alan's colleagues, and Caitlin's neighbors. The picture of a family tragedy gradually came together. Jake Butler testified, saying, "Dad wasn't a bad man, but after the army, he changed. He became withdrawn, and Mom changed too. They stopped talking to each other." Emma added, "If they had just talked, if they had sought help, maybe things would have been different." Michael Thornton left Pine Ridge immediately after giving his testimony. "I can't stay here," he told Detective Wright. "Everywhere I look, I'm reminded of what happened." An expert report confirmed that Alan had PTSD, but at the time of the murder, he was aware of his actions. The judge handed down a sentence of 25 years in prison for second-degree murder. "There are no winners in family tragedies," the judge said as he handed down the sentence. 2 children have been left orphaned. A man will spend the best years of his life in prison, and a young woman is dead. All of this could have been prevented if people had learned to talk to each other instead of hiding behind walls of silence and pride. Jake and Emma Butler moved in with their Aunt Caitlin in Grand Rapids. The house on Maple Street was put up for sale, but no buyers came forward. In small towns, memories of tragedies live on for a long time. Detective Wright closed the case, but she thought about it for a long time. In her report, she wrote, "The murder could have been prevented if the family had sought psychological help and family counseling in a timely manner. The risk factors were obvious. The husband's post-traumatic stress disorder, family alienation, alcohol addiction, and marital infidelity. Pine Ridge returned to its usual quiet life, but residents talked for a long time about the Butler family and how quickly something that seemed strong and secure could fall apart. The local newspaper published an article about the importance of family counseling and assistance for veterans. Pastor Walker organized a support group for military families. "We can't change the past," he said at Sunday service, "but we can learn lessons to prevent similar tragedies in the future." Alan Butler is serving his sentence in a Michigan state prison. He participates in a veterans rehabilitation program and group therapy. In rare letters to his children, he asks for forgiveness and advises them never to repeat their parents' mistakes.